Hello and welcome to today's webinar on deploying market infrastructure managed services. My name's Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor here at 18 Group and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are Nicolas Bonnet, Director Global Connectivity Product at ICE, Robert Johnson, CTO at Coremont, and Bill Fennick, an independent trading technology and managed services specialist. I'll ask them all to introduce themselves in a moment, but first let me give you a few tips about using the webinar. To the right of your video screen, you'll see a panel where we'll be running some polls and you can ask the speakers some questions. We'll be running 3 polls today, so I'll let you know when they're coming up, and please do vote so we can gauge what your interests are in this area. And please do use the question panel anytime you want. Pose your questions as we go along, and we'll be taking your questions as we go along. Otherwise, you know what happens. We get to the end and we haven't answered any audience questions. So put your questions up there and we'll get to them sometime through the webinar. So that's it from me, and let me come over to our speakers and ask them to introduce themselves. Nicolas, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest in market infrastructure managed services.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. My name is Nicolas Bonnet. I work for ICE Data Services, where I'm in charge of the collocation and connectivity product. We recently announced a collaboration with Taxonomy, a technical solution provider, which allows now ICE to offer the full suite of managed services. It's a very exciting collaboration, and we are here today to talk about managed services and how it can benefit the industry. So looking forward to that discussion.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert.
Hi, I'm Rob Johnson. I'm CTO at Coremont. We're a soup to nuts managed service provider for the principally buy side, hedge funds mostly. We are a different kind of managed service to ICE, and we'll talk about the differences later on.
Okay, thank you. And Bill.
Hi, my name is Bill Fennick. Currently, I'm advising a few fintech firms around digital wallets, blockchain, and data connectivity and data in and of itself. But previous life, I was vice president of Interaction, running enterprise, where I had the financial services under me. And then prior to that, I actually was the initial or the head of Electron Managed Services from Thomson Reuters back when we introduced it to the market. So I still got quite a few of the scars, which hopefully I can contribute those experiences to on this call.
Excellent. Thank you all. And let's get started with our Q&A. But first, an audience poll. The question is, what is your organization's interest in moving from ownership of hosted hardware in your trading infrastructure to third-party procurement and managed services? So while you answer that question, let me come to Nicolas to talk about the extent he's seeing a change in hosted infrastructure ownership among trading organizations.
Thank you. So the interesting thing is that we see the same shift across multiple industries and technology, which is the shift from purchase to subscription. We see that for software moving from on-prem to SaaS platform. We see that from storage moving from on-prem to public cloud, and we observe the same pattern for managed services for trading infrastructure. The interesting thing, is that the only difference is that these infrastructure have to stay on-prem because of the latency requirement. But maybe before we dive into that discussion around managed services, maybe we can start by defining what managed services is. From an ICE standpoint, there are 3 components to managed services. The first one is the space and power, where your trading platform is going to be hosted. Usually, it's in a colocation facilities, meaning an access center where you have one or multiple trading venues operating a matching engine. Then you have the connectivity around your trading platform, whether it's to communicate within the building or outside the building. And then you have the hardware procurement, monitoring and support, which is the latest addition to ICE. And so these 3 components can be bought as a package or a la carte. And this is now what we offer.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert, what would you say there in terms of what you're seeing?
Well, there's quite a lot to unpack there. I think, so we know and I can't argue with anything Nicholas has said, unfortunately, so we're going to have to agree on this. But so we know what we're talking about, I think it's helpful to consider a basic taxonomy of managed services. These have different levels of maturity and adoption, different use cases. The classes of tiers aren't necessarily better than one another, they're just very different. So to contextualize what we're talking about today, if we start with the least abstract case, old school IaaS, infrastructure as a service, managing your tin, a third-party provider owns the data center, the servers, the network connectivity and all that, gives you access to it. It's pure IaaS, been around forever, at least for anyone that graduated this century. I don't know where it really started, but Rackspace has been around since '98. So that's in this discussion. Moving one step more abstract, we get abstracted virtual instances. You get a reliable server image deployed that can be repeatedly redeployed, pretty much PaaS, platform as a service. Again, nothing very new there. I'd also put microservices or lambdas into this class because they're effectively lightweight virtualized processes that scale up and down, more or less on demand. You terraform your image, cookie cutter as many instances as you want, and then you get all the benefits of the IaaS plus this additional virtualization. So that's in this discussion. And then we move on to how you manage stuff. And this is kind of ties in with, Nicholas has basically covered the first two. Also, managing them, you can take independent managed services where you're talking about an outsourced individual service. Maybe you want a best breed approach to provider selection, or you're not ready for a big bang wholesale handoff of responsibility to a third party. So an example might be outsourcing maintenance of some or all of your database estate, or your data center hardware, as Nicholas just alluded to. Or if you don't want to go all in, you can maintain control by persisting a control or strategy team of permanent staff with your lifted handed over to a third party on a prescribed portion of the estate, and that may be, again, what Nicholas was alluding to, or maybe the provision and monitoring of networking infrastructure or something like that. Anyway, I'd also include some single service functions into this, like a managed security master or maybe a market data delivery platform, that kind of thing. After that, we're still in context of this discussion, multifunctional managed services. So essentially someone else looks after a significant portion of your estate. You have a reduced number of contracts to worry about because you're dealing with fewer vendors. They deliver a broad range of support across a support function, provide a consolidated support structure, and they pick up all the support of potentially both your on-premise and in cloud infrastructure. They take responsible for all the continuous monitoring, support, optimization, et cetera, and they can cover your servers, your cloud environments, data storage, databases, networking security, and even some enterprise solutions like email, CRM, internet, etc. That's kind of still it. We're still in that just about. And then we get to federated business services. Now, this is the bit we're not talking about here, and that's services that sit on top of your support function. So we're talking less about IT services and more about the business services that are built on top. Full disclosure, and I said we provide managed services as well. This is where my firm fall in. We're an example where we provide a federated set of buy-side services. So that's quant, technology, treasury, compliance, middle and back office. All those capabilities that sit on top of your infrastructure. But the benefits are the same, really, because what you look at with a managed service is that someone has a track record of continually refining and optimizing processes and mutualizing costs and being more cost effective than trying to do it all yourself. So in this forum, we're discussing all the above except for the last one. We're more focusing on those. So what's changed? What am I seeing differently? First of all, what hasn't changed in the last 10 years is that everyone wants the same things: accurate and timely market data, effective analytics to derive insights from it, and a reliable connected infrastructure to run it all on that runs at a speed that's appropriate for the form of the trading you're undertaking, and the whole co-location question comes up there. The other thing that hasn't changed is outsourcing. It's not new. We've always done it. We've always bought data from third parties, applications from third parties. We've trusted hardware manufacturers to screw together their servers adequately, better than we can do it ourselves. And we even let someone else run the cables into our buildings and handle our telephony. What has changed? So the availability of options of the services available and the talent to utilise them. So resistance has historically it's been derived from a lack of availability, a lack of understanding, and or trust. So considering availability, there's many tiers to managed services, but for example, managed infrastructure provision is now broadly accepted. Why? It's a competitive marketplace. Okay, there's still a few dominant players, but it's very competitive nonetheless. There's also niche requirements, and I'd probably put co-location into the niche bucket because it's key to this particular, our financial services marketplace. FPGA rental is niche, but it's across everywhere, for example. So there's widespread maturity in the market, and that illustrates availability. Understanding a technology has a couple of aspects. Got to be sufficient talent and experience to leverage the service. That has been growing. There has to be an understanding of the impact it will make on the purchaser's business. So the mechanisms to appropriately leverage the managed services have evolved. For example, there's now a greater availability of DevOps engineers capable of building services in cloud. Ergo, it's easier to leverage those services. There's a broader appreciation of the risks associated with outsourcing, and this is quite key. This is something that has become a whole industrial thing. How do you measure it? We've extrapolated out from our older assessments of Intel versus AMD. Yeah, how do you run Intel MKL on an AMD chip? Does that matter? Or data center shed providers or networking providers? Because fundamentally, it's still outsourcing. It's all the same kind of thing. And that finally brings us to trust. So if we couple the demonstrable track record of managed service providers with increased capabilities of purchasers to assert the appropriateness of the service and to understand and mitigate the risks of contracting out that service, then we reach a point of trust. Now, at present, there's no direct regulation around what fintechs do or what happens. I know that the EU have got DORA, Digital Operational Resilience, something or other, act coming along, and there's going to be a proposed UK response to that. But again, that will formalise this trust element. I know DORA has been agreed by some parties, so that's going to happen. There was an announcement in Parliament last week about the UK's response. But again, it's a degree of formalism around trust in relationships between providers and consumers of this sort of technology. So we're seeing a growing maturity in the provider marketplace. There is competition. Firms have track records that demonstrate competence and their capability to scale. And there's less resistance to managed services in general across the board. Finally, I guess the tin strokers who aren't satisfied unless they've personally plugged in their own servers have just started dying off. I was talking recently with a CIO of a well-known regulatory body. He's moved his entire infrastructure to cloud. So if the regulators are okay with it, wholesale managed services, we know times have changed. Anyway, it's a long time since I've heard we don't do public cloud, we only do private cloud line. Maybe I just hang around with the wrong crowd.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what our audience is thinking of doing, and here are the poll results. Okay, Nicholas, would you like to comment on those? Is that what you might expect? Early days, or what do you think?
It seems that based on the answer, it's the early days because people are just looking at that as an option. So hopefully their webinar today will give them some guidance, some answers to their sort of potential adoption of managed services, and we can go from there.
Excellent. Thank you for your comment. That's great. Thank you. And yes, let's move on and coming back to you, Robert. What are the challenges here of procuring and sustaining hosted market data infrastructure for trading organizations?
Well, as I mentioned, market data provision has always been a managed service. Really, who runs their own sentiment polls or derives a market rate based on their own trading books? Well, maybe in some corners of an illiquid credit market, with the marks being bilaterally quoted in the market, that has some relevance, and it's recognised by some services like the broker quote capture fees. But where there's any notable degree of liquidity, market rates carry more weight, and it's empirical by volume. So financial services participants use managed services throughout the market data provision chain, from origination, an exchange or broker, through the delivery channel to our servers and desktops. The more recent differences have been in the hosting and delivery mechanism. So there's a couple of paradigms. Where a single vendor takes a function that we would historically have managed on premise, like an application or database, perhaps they put their own skin across it, they're now hosting themselves as SaaS and delivering over the wire, or hosting it in cloud and using your cloud vendor of choice to provide the connectivity. So an example would be, like, I don't know, a hosted security master, something like that, or a component of it, like a matching engine, or the provision of hosted streaming infrastructure. So the positives of this are you've got a hosted, this sort of hosted tech masters type of approaches. Your setup time is quicker. Data quality rules might be available in play already, or the data schema is pre-built. Interfaces are already documented and live. Sourcing and cleansing is probably carried out for you. And on that note, don't underestimate the effort involved in data curation. We provide this as a service to our clients, and it's far from a trivial undertaking. So managed data provision is a biggie, infrastructure or otherwise. You need quants to tell you what data is good, data procurement specialists to tell you what the price should be, technologists to tell you how to import and manage it, legal team to manage a plethora of contracts that you have to manage, an audit management team, the list goes on and on. Also, there's no significant local infrastructure provisioning costs if you host, which is a biggie, right? So your patching cycles get handled for you. Negatives are you still have to analyse all your use cases, current operational architecture. You've got to figure out where your internal data producers and consumers live. You still have to plumb the data feeds into your downstream systems. You might be concerned about the fact that you don't hold the data in a bulk storage silo of your own, on your own tin. So you're subject to increased credit default risk, perhaps, should the vendor fail. Obviously, if your vendor connectivity fails, you're dead in the water. Whereas if this were all locally hosted on your own premises, then you die a slow death, depending on the tick cadence of the feed. Another scenario is more like what Nicholas was talking about, is around the provision of hosted infrastructure. So effectively, it's drawing back the vendor's distribution point from the edge into a centralized service where your users connect directly to the vendor's hosted endpoint rather than connected to locally hosted tin in your own data center. So the benefits of this, again, setup time is quick. Your hosting costs reflect the level of your usage rather than having a familiar high cost of entry. You don't have to contract with a data center provider. You don't have to have your own people in the data center plumbing it in, etc. Drawbacks are you now connect across and rely on someone else's patching cycle. You probably pay more. That's the simple truth. It's probably cheaper and quicker to get into the market, but you'll pay a premium over time. Managed service providers don't do this for free. There are, however, economies of scale involved, so it may not be as much as you expect. Plus, you don't have to pay for a full support engineer for 24/7. You pay partial costs on these things. And 24/7 and holiday cover, etc., etc. So the cost of entry, the entry level is lower. You just pay over time.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because otherwise we're going to use up too much time. But thank you for that. Bill, would you sum up, please, your views on the challenges here of hosting your own stuff?
Yeah, let me see if I can perhaps simplify it a bit, perhaps from the vendor side as well. The challenges are really picking the right partners. All partners have their strengths and their weaknesses. So it's really finding the right ones that can help you. And then once you've found that partner, really deciding and determining the SLAs. And the challenge here is, can they support those SLAs? It's all fine to put them into writing, but it's actually supporting them during trading hours or what have you. That's that's a big one. What we always found, though, quite honestly, for our challenge was that, prospects, customers were outsourcing kind of nightmares that they didn't quite know how to manage themselves. So they're outsourcing an issue to us back in my kind of Electron, where my old Electron hat, that we knew was difficult as well for the customers. And it's all great to be very, with all bravado to go in and say, hey, we can do that. But sometimes you bite off a bit more than you can chew. So these are some of the real kind of simplistic challenges. But I think the biggest challenge, quite honestly, is picking the right vendor, who you can partner with and who you can trust, to go back to one of Robert's points that he made.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Let's move on and ask our audience our next poll question. And the question this time is, what are the drivers of change for moving from in-house hardware procurement and management to managed services at your trading organization? You can tick as many of the boxes as you feel are appropriate. And while you do that, let me come back to Bill, if I may, to talk about why trading organizations are making or considering a move from traditional hardware procurement and management to managed hardware procurement and services. I think we've touched on a lot of these, but if you could just encapsulate.
Yeah, perhaps I'll try to encapsulate maybe one or two other points. It's really to take advantages of all the innovation that happens in the infrastructure hardware world. We know that the technology advances are happening a mile a minute, so to speak. And sometimes putting it through your own internal procurement processes, IT service, security, legal, etc., really slows down the adoption of new technologies. So that's one of the great advantages. And the second one is that you might not have that resource, that specific bespoke resource in-house that understands these new technologies. And it's great to just pull that resource in. If you have an expert sitting on the other side who actually understands this upside down, you can pull that person in, or the people in, that can really add a lot of benefit to the overall.
Okay, Nicholas, what would you add there from your experience?
Yeah, maybe something that was previously mentioned by Rob and Bill. I think the worst thing we see from customers is how they can best use their talents. I think nowadays it's really hard to attract talents. It's really hard to keep them motivated. You need to think about how you use them and whether they need to be I don't know, as an example, on a call at 10 p.m. A senior network engineer just to talk to a data center engineer just to get a port up and running. And you don't want, your talent to do that. You want your talent to focus on, producing alpha, on, leveraging their skills and knowledge. And I think this is where managed services can bring a lot to the table. The other things that we see is the time to market. I think we are right now going through a very volatile, time, and, trading desk are identifying, opportunities. They want to go quick, but the IT teams may not be able to keep up the pace. And if we look at Europe right now, we have two major exchanges moving, from one data center to another data center. If your trading desk is identifying an opportunity in Europe and wants to launch a new trading platform, the IT team will be, the internal IT team may not be able to deliver. This is where, you may need, help. Then you want to expand in a new region and you don't have any IT team. Do you need to wait for a full team to be built before, expanding in that region? No, you can rely on people with that expertise, with the local resources. So I think, every organization, this is what's very interesting, is every organization has a different set of challenges. So it's about, what is the problem or the problems you're trying to address. And this is where managed services can help you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see the poll results, if we may. And Bill, can I come to you? I'm afraid the option of faster time to market is not on here, but Bill, what would you say?
Well, I mean, sorry, I'm reading the question here quickly. People talk a lot about time to market, and I read something a while back that I actually liked better than time to market. It was time to value. Yeah. And once again, with the hardware change and scalability, that would be the driver, is where does it actually bring the value immediately? It's not just getting it up and running. A lot of things are put into production very quickly, but whether they're bringing value to the downstream customers, etc. So I'm not surprised to see that hardware is the first one there, and it looks like, well, it's the majority. Yeah, not surprised at all to see that.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And coming back to you, Nicholas, what types of managed services are offered by third-party vendors? What do they include, and what levels of performance do they guarantee? I think that's something Bill mentioned early on the SLAs.
So when we look at managed services, and especially in the context of trading infrastructure, because this is what we do at ICE, I think we are back to kind of the three main components. The first and second ones are the environment. First, the space and the power where you're going to host your trading platform. Do you need to buy a full cabinet just to rack a couple of servers because your trading strategy doesn't need more than a couple of servers? So this is where a managed services, can help you to, maintain your cost low. Then you have all the connectivity around, your trading platform. You have your connectivity between your servers, how your server, they talk to each other. Then those servers, they're going to have to access the local market. So the one that's in the same colocation facilities. And this is where, managed service provider, they will try to find innovative way of connecting you to the market as low as possible. And nowadays, everyone is using layer one technology. And, this is something that's important to customer. They don't want to be penalized too much by going through a managed service vendor. And then obviously you have the connectivity outside of the building, whether you want your traders to access the trading platform to make change on your algorithm, whether your IT team wants to support and monitor your platform. And then you have what's happening, outside of the world. How do you get signal from other markets so that your platform can react and trade or, pull a position based on what they see outside of the world. And the third, which is, the one we recently added is, hardware procurement. Whether you want, outright purchase or lease, this is an option. Maybe you don't need to invest, in hardware that usually you're going to amortize over 3 years. Maybe you want just, a piece of hardware for 12 months because you want to try a new trading strategy, and you may decide to stop if it's not successful. So in that case, lease, can be a good option. Then you have your operating system and server management. You have the monitoring. You can work with partner, and we do that with Takeaway. They have a wonderful portal where customer can customize how they want to monitor the level of, the alerts, the level of result where they want alerts, and an interface as well that could be very useful to the customer. And then you have the support, the break fix, support of the entire platform. I also think that on top of everything, a vendor offering managed services should first come with a sort of like consulting offering. How can I help you to best address, your need and your question? We shouldn't expect the customer to tell us, yeah, this is exactly what you want, please deliver. No, we should be here to help them to make decision. We should be able to help them, maybe choosing different hardware than what they've been using for years because of the global supply chain issue that may not work with their time to market or time to value, as Bill was using. Then there is the coordination. It's a lot of effort to build a new trading platform. You have to deal with shipment, staging, racking, patching, configuration, et cetera, et cetera. And a managed services vendor can bring that coordination to you so that you don't have to worry about all those little tasks that are definitely not mission critical, but you need all of them to be completed to get your platform up and running and ready to trade. So that's kind of the type of managed services then we offer in the context of trading infrastructure. In terms of, sorry.
Okay.
Now, I just wanted to answer the level of performance.
Yeah.
I think it's back to this kind of risk versus cost scenario. I think it's no different than whether you build or you buy. This is the same thing. The one thing that you benefit from working with a managed services is that they have an expertise across different teams on different technology that you can leverage and that you don't need to build in-house. So that's something you can quickly benefit because you can rely on your partner to run and operate your platform.
Okay, I'm going to move on. We've talked a lot about what you can have. How are you going to get it, Bill? How can firms build a business case for migration to managed services in this way? There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, they have to be very clear in articulating their business requirements. To go back to what Nicola saying, what is your actual need? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And once you've defined that, and then of course the managed service provider can work with the customer on that one. But once you've defined that, you have to have the requirements, and then you have to put your set of objectives out there quite clearly. This is phase 1. This is phase 2. I think another really good way to build a business case is to take something relatively vanilla, ensure that you can actually get it up and running. Ensure, like, to go back to something Rob had mentioned earlier, ensure that the trust is there to get a very vanilla service up and running is really, really important. Could very well be a hosted feed. It could be procurement of hardware. Something relatively vanilla, though, that should be a seamless process, just to kind of get a bit more not just stability under there, but that security that we can deliver this. So not to go after the big bang right away, but do it piecemeal. Those would be the business cases that I would help build.
Okay, Robert, what would you add there?
I'd present the pros and cons in the same way that you would any other service cost or any other transition. Typically, a decision point is driven by observation. An existing service might be end of life, so the metric is replacement, either in-house, either build, buy, gluing, castellated set of application and service together. Either way, there'll be a CapEx hit. So presenting an OpEx-based managed service might be preferable from an accounting perspective. So the managed service cost needs to be assessed against cost of replacement versus another on-premise solution, cost of replacement versus an in-house build, or it may be the case that a managed service is considered preferable when measured against an incumbent solution. So you're not actually changing, but there might be some business driver. In this instance, we measure the cost of the service versus maintenance cost of the incumbent system and any value adds. But each of the forms of managed service that I referred to earlier have different pros and cons, but they kind of boil down to some clear metrics you can use. Cost of entry, time to market, CapEx versus OpEx, and support team costs, maintenance, key person risk, and the fact that you have fewer contractual arrangements, got to be good, right? Fundamentally, anything that's not alpha, revenue generating to your business, is ripe for this kind of assessment. So if you can approach it contextually, appropriately, and factor in some of those metrics, that's probably the way I'd go about it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on and come to you, Nicholas, next to talk about the practicalities of doing this. How can existing in-house infrastructure be replaced with managed services and integrated with hosted networks and market data solutions?
I think the one thing we don't see that as a all-in on day one. I think it's a progressive effort, and it can very much start without replacing anything that you have already on ground. It could be by spinning off, let's say, your monitoring and your support. You want to keep the same infrastructure. You don't want to touch anything because it runs as it is, but you're struggling to monitor, you're struggling to support. You can outsource that. And it could be a phase 1 of relationship. I think it's back to what was said earlier. You're building the trust, you're building the confidence, you're showcasing the fact that you have the competencies, you have the knowledge to help the customer. And it could be a phase 1. And then phase 2, you can move to replacing or maybe building a new infrastructure, which is like, again, this progressive collaboration, trying to show that you can deliver what you promised and what you have on the order form. So whether you want, to refresh an entire site, whether you want to build a new site, you can start like this with a vendor. And then if the vendor can demonstrate that they have this capacity, then you can expand the partnership and you can look at other infrastructure, other location. But really, we think that it's a it's a long way to go from, the first discussion you're going to have with the vendor to having, everything replaced by, managed services. It's a phased approach, and this is the only way to gain, as a vendor, the trust and the confidence of your customer.
Okay, thank you. As Bill said, no big bang theories here. And coming back to you, Bill, if I may, what are the challenges here? And are there instances where managed services just aren't a good solution?
Yes, there are instances. I mean, Nicola mentioned right away off the get-go around the ultra-low latency. That might be a situation where you just don't want to trust a third party to do it. I think as well, if you have highly tuned hardware, the challenge is this, that particularly if you have round the clock or round the sun, or however you want to call it, support, is that if you have a highly tuned hardware that potentially is difficult to support, we can't just simply assume that everybody will know how to support it. So potentially during London business hours, it's absolutely fine. But all of a sudden at 3 o'clock in the morning, when something happens and Asia's starting to open, then you have to watch that. That really kind of plays in once again with the SLAs. The SLAs are so incredibly important, and that's where you might fall down. Now, nobody falls down, relatively speaking, on the legal part. It's when the proverbial hits the fan is when people fall down. And so, and people actually start to read the SLAs, with a fine, with a magnifying glass, so to speak. So these, I would say, are the things where, you have to watch what you wish for. You can't just outsource everything. You have to be able to outsource the things that are reliable and can be supported. And if they can't be supported, then think twice about it.
Okay, excellent. Let's take a little bit of time out now for some audience questions. So let me pick them up here. And I think coming back to you, Nicola, the question is, our organization is looking at this. Please would the panel suggest a cost-effective and systems optimal start point? Well, I think you pointed out this is a phased approach. Where should people be starting?
I think it's back to what, I think Bill said a couple of times. I think it's down to understanding the need of the customer. You're not going to go to a meeting with a customer and convince them that they need managed services if you don't even understand, exactly what they need. So I think it's back to tell me what you need, tell me, where you think there is an inefficiencies in your organization, in your hardware, management, in your trading platform, and see how I can help. And then, this is when you know the need, then you can work on the economics and see how, it can be beneficial for you. But it's really down to, what the customer needs to me. And I think there will be a different number, a different, tipping point based on exactly what the customer wants, in terms of performance, in terms of resiliency, in terms of what they want to outsource versus what they want to keep full control on. Okay,
perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Bill, one for you. And it says, what happens to existing owned systems if an organization moves to a hosted environment? Obviously, it's something of a cost question.
What happens to the proprietary system if they go hosted? Is that the question? Yeah. Well, look, proprietary systems have a lifetime as well. They're finite. It's not a continuum. So, that should be played in the whole process of the decision-making process in terms of, we are going to go through a hardware refresh. What is the best route to do that? Is the best route to use a managed service provider, or shall we procure them ourselves? We all know about the supply chain issues today as well. So it's very much a current challenge. Now, it doesn't mean that the managed service provider might have a better supply chain than you, but so systems have a lifetime to them, a finite lifetime, and they do retire. And that's when really there's the prod to say, what are we going to do next? What other options are on the market for us to look at, rather than just kind of, as they say in the Midwest of the States, just repaving the cow paths.
Okay, fine. So all tied up with everything else, really. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Robert, one for you. You've started down this line before, so if you could gather it all together and answer this one. It says, please would the panel provide a rough cost analysis of moving to managed market infrastructure?
Cost analysis, okay. So in order to do a cost analysis, you've got to basically understand your costs at present. You need to be able to assess and basically do a balance sheet of where your costs are going and run them out over time. So some people can do that and some people can't. I would imagine most reasonably sized companies can do this anyway. And then we talked about the CapEx versus OpEx model, and that's fundamentally the key part of some of this. But also you have to think about your staffing costs throughout. You have to go down through the lines of your key person risk. And if you're a small company, actually this is quite tangible. You might run smaller teams, so that makes it much more attractive. That what isn't captured by that is the time to market, and a lot of the managed services are generally going to be quicker than you can manage this sort of thing yourself. So cost analysis doesn't tell the full picture, but I think it gets you a chunk of the way there.
Okay, fine. So it's a good starting point for the small start that you're going to phase through, considering your existing machines. There's a lot, again, going on here. Nicholas, one final question for you here. It says, we are thinking of building an environment of both owned and hosted infrastructure. How viable is this?
That's a very good question. So they want to
Mix.
run in power.
Yeah.
Mix?
Yes.
Why not? I think, when it comes to resilience, it could be, a high availability system. It could be, a good solution, I think, having a platform managed by a partner, as I said earlier, you can benefit of, their core competencies, the knowledge that they have across, the various teams, and they may be able, to manage, issues or, improvements, updates that, you may not have, in-house. So I think it's, it's a great way of as well assessing, the benefit of managed services and whether, not that it's a competition, but maybe, after a couple of years running in parallel, you can look, at the performances, you can look at the cost as well. I think, but you need to keep, an accurate track of the cost. I think, as Rob was saying, there is a cost that's really hard to track, internally, like all the, couple of hours that people are going to spend on doing things. And then it's back to, my talent, element, you may ask, some of your talents to do things that they don't really think, it's part of their job. And, you are maybe affecting their motivation and things like this. So I think, yeah, it's an interesting concept, and yeah, I think you can maximize your availability while assessing maybe moving more into managed services.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to my questions and staying with you, Nicholas, could you share a case study of changing infrastructure ownership and how it turned out?
Yes, so we worked with the customer at the end of last year while we were finalizing our partnership, and basically the customer came to us and said, guys, I want to launch a new low latency trading desk in a couple of locations in US. I'm not really interested in purchasing the hardware myself. I want a lease-based service. So can you help me? So the first thing, I think we are all back to understand the need of your customer, trying to see what they are trying to achieve in terms of design, in terms of performance. I think, what we managed to bring to the table was our respective, core competencies. At ICE, data services, it's about, hosting, it's about connectivity, co-location. And, we had Techery, helping with the hardware, the choice of hardware. I remember seeing conversation, down to the chip side, level with the customer, just to see how we could best, design the solution and make the most of the latency. So I think there is this whole consultancy design that was very, very important. And that's also helps you to showcase, your competencies, your skills, and you start building the trust. What we did after all, this conversation and this prep work was to agree on a phased approach. Let's start with one site, and then if I'm happy as a customer, I will then move to a second site. So after agreeing on all of that, we moved to the sort of like order form procurement element, and having one single agreement to sign makes the procurement, effort much simpler. I think, if you want to build that on your own, you need to sign agreement with hosting facilities, with your hardware procurement, et cetera, et cetera. You sign one piece of paper and you can have all your service included into that document. So for the customer, it's a big advantage. Then you move to delivering, and I think the coordination was key, just to demonstrate that you can coordinate all the moving pieces to get the first platform up and running. Then you have the handover, the documentation, the training, explaining, how the portal works and the type of alert and the support, et cetera, et cetera. And the first phase was very successful. And after that, the customer say, okay, guys, I trust you. I know you can deliver. So now let's move to phase 2 and go look at the second side. So again, we are back to building the trust and having a phased approach.
Okay, thank you. Robert, do you have a short story you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. So while we're a managed service provider, we also use managed services. I might mention you carry grandfathering risk if you use managed service, because there's other things under the hood. So we provide federated business services. What you want to look for in a managed service provider is similar traits depending on what kind of managed service you're looking at, but they all share things like you look for a track record of continually refined and optimized processes. You look for mutualized costs, things that other people can do better, things that aren't alpha for you. They're not you're not your revenue generation thing, and that's where we come in, and that's actually where Nicholas comes in as well. This is things that you as a specialist can handle better. So I mentioned we're a managed service. Yeah, we use other managed services. We built out essentially an on-premise system, and then we basically lifted the whole lot into cloud to enable us to service things globally. We use one cloud vendor. Other cloud vendors are available. We provide curated data services. We take data from a range of people, including our good friends at ICE. So what are we looking to do? I mean, when we leverage other services, we're looking at other people's services like securities matching services, infrastructure provision. We're a cloud-first organization, so we flip the argument around now and make people justify why they buy on-premise kit. And I would say Nicholas's argument is very similar to this. Why would you do it yourself? Why would I want to co-locate in a data center myself when ICE or other similar firms can do it for me? The benefits, some of our clients are using services such as Nicholas's. They get co-located. They have the flexibility to get into different locations quickly, and they grow out from the first site into other sites. One thing I don't know if you mentioned, Nicholas, I didn't hear it. You don't necessarily need a local contracting entity. So if you want to be in NY whatever and LD whatever, we contract with, or our clients contract with one entity of the global services provider, and then they get access to all of the data centers globally around the world. So if you want to be in the US market, they put you in the US warehouse. If you want to be in an EMEA market, they'll be in somewhere close to London. And you can start in one, and then you can move to others, etc., with one contract. So yeah, we've got clients doing that. I mean, we have other stuff that we do, fixed infrastructure. Why would you buy your own? Or why would you roll your own? You just buy someone else's. And then there's all the usual stuff that everybody does: market data origination, execution, etc. So yeah, we're tiered. So we use other people's stuff. I mean, that's the way it is.
Okay. Let's leave that one there then, and let's move on. Let's run the last poll. I'm not sure we'll have time to comment on it, but at least we can see what people are thinking. And it asks, what extent of business and operational benefits would your organization expect to gain from adopting third-party procurement and managed services? So hit the button, please, in the audience. And let me come up to you, Bill, to talk a little bit about business and operational benefits of moving from in-house ownership of hosted hardware to managed procurement services. And halfway through, I'll ask Jerry Ann to put up the poll results, and you might want to say something completely different. So you start.
Well, I mean, I think I'm just going to reiterate a lot of what was already said, which I think is extremely valuable. There is a cost efficiency potentially with the OPEX versus CAPEX. There's the adoption of a quicker adoption, if you will, of the latest and greatest in terms of technology. There's also, leveraging expertise that does not sit in-house, which I think can be phenomenally important as well. That you can leverage, be it cloud, be it low latency trading, application support, that you can leverage a lot of that. So that, the benefits, I'll just kind of repeat everything we've already said here, but the benefits are very wide. I think though the biggest benefit, and I'm kind of putting my hat on back when I introduced, if you will, electron managed services to the European market, the maturity, it's much more mature now. It's actually, in life, everything is timing, and the managed services piece is much more mature now. And I think it's because people are opening up a bit more the kimono in the sense that, of course, they're adopting cloud with the big cloud providers, but they're much more receptive to the offer today than perhaps when I introduced it to the market a few years ago. So those, I would say, are some of the benefits.
Okay, fine. Let's just see the poll result, if we may, to see what people are thinking. Yeah, there you go. Pretty much as you said. Yeah, good. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, and finally, I'd like to ask all our speakers to gather up all the things we've talked about today and offer some advice to practitioners who are moving or planning to move from owned infrastructure to managed services. Nicholas, would you like to start here?
I would say first, think about your need and think about the problems you're trying to address. The vendor is not going to come to you and address problems that they don't understand. Is that about, resources? Is that about time to market? Is that about, hardware availability? You need to, really think about what you want the managed services, vendor to address. Then the second one is work more with a partner more than a vendor. You want the partner to listen to you. You want the partner to try to understand your problem and then build a solution based on your exact problem, rather than just like, look, we have that on the shelf, we can give that to you, but we cannot really customize. I think the customization has to, depends on the customer, but I think you need to offer that. Otherwise, you can't really, force a customer to adopt a design that they are not very comfortable with. And the last one is never, stop assessing and reviewing the capacities of your partner to deliver. Are you sure they are maintaining, in-house skills and core competencies so that they can keep on delivering the level of performances that you've signed maybe, a month ago, a year ago? Make sure they maintain that in-house so that they can keep on, delivering what you expect and what you've signed for.
Okay, Robert, what would your advice be?
I suppose the first one, it's not unique to managed services per se, but consider your dependence on the provider. Managed services is quite a big deal, right? So institute a vendor risk assessment procedure if you haven't got it, or review it at least. Consider the vendor's track record, look at the probability of default, who else uses their service, how much of a capital commitment is this, over what term, what savings can you make off the back of it, all the usual stuff, but it's particularly key with a managed service because they're so important. And then highly correlated to that is consider the SLAs and SLOs, both yours and the vendors. Okay, so if yours are tighter than theirs, then you're going to need to build additional mitigation into your own build, right? So if theirs is 3 nines, you need 4 nines. You're going to have to work around that somehow. They're not just going to go, oh, actually, we can do 4 nines after all. If you're looking at cloud, for example, then multiple AZ is given, but multi-region is the next step to handle that. And then you hit all sorts of replication latency issues. Obviously, multi-cloud means you get big costs. Finally, remember that a vendor's not going to reimburse you for loss of business, just like any other purchase, right? You consider the blast radius of a catastrophic service failure. What damage limitation measures can you put in place? Are there business recovery or short-term survival procedures you can follow that don't depend on that service? It's just about risk assessment, effectively.
Okay, thank you. And Bill, some words from you.
Well, let's see. Once again, I can kind of repeat a lot of things that's already been said, but you know, to paraphrase a little bit, you know, what problems are you trying to solve? Make sure those are clear, that you understand what problems you're trying to solve. Another thing, as I've said before, start small. Start small and build up. Don't bite off too, you know, more than you can chew. And it's kind of like, you know, do the easy ones first. I mean, I used to always tell my children before they did a maths exam, you know, do the easy ones first, get the points in quickly, right? Don't do the hard ones, you know, focus on the easy ones, get them in. And it would be the same for managed services. Focus on the easy ones. Get a bit of momentum going, get a bit of trust going, get a bit of the partnership, the relationship going, you know, everything that's really quite important to the whole you know, affair is the thing to focus on. So the easy ones first. That's what I would my big advice.
Okay, fine. Thank you. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience today. And thank you too to ICE for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we close up, just a few 18 group items that may be of interest to you. If you scroll down the screen to additional options, you can find out about 18 Connect, our professional platform that you can use to deliver highly effective and interactive events and webinars. You can also download our latest trading regulations handbook, and you can sign up for Trading Tech Insight Briefing NYC, which perhaps in the first time in 2 years will be in person in NYC on the 16th of June. You can find that, as I say, at the bottom of your screen. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to Nicholas, Robert and Bill, and thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meantime, thanks again and goodbye.